Hi everyone, welcome back to Into Deep, a podcast with me, Alyssa. In this podcast, we go a little too deep into everything feminism, from the forced masculinization of meat to the sexualization of animals. Yes, this is the vegan episode. You all knew it was coming. You all knew I had to do a vegan episode, and so that's what we're doing today. Personally, I've been vegan since 2016, so almost 10 years now. So I'd say I have a pretty good experience, or pretty robust experience with being vegan. Essentially, this episode, we're going to talk about the interconnections between veganism and feminism, the history, like the historical connections between those two, and also like the theoretical connections between them as well. Before I start, I'm not sure if you guys saw, but there was like a mass deportation from Pakistan of Afghan people back to Afghanistan. Of those people, there were 60 women activists who, if they were to be deported back to Afghanistan, would be under the Taliban regime, which means they would be subject to violence, torture, and execution. Unfortunately, the deportations for that already begun, but the Brazilian government has offered to take these women, except it costs a lot of money to resettle 60 women in a different country. So I have a donation link in the description, in my link tree probably. If you're able to donate anything, it'll be in the description. Okay, let's get on with the episode. Honestly, I feel like I was predisposed to becoming vegan. Like, I have so many memories from my childhood where like there was like some animal cruelty like story or like in a movie or something, and it stuck with me forever, and I would just think about it all the time, and I'd be like, oh my god, like that's horrific. When I was in like year 5, my teacher told this story about like cutting off a chicken's head. I didn't stop. I genuinely almost started crying in class, and everyone else was laughing, and I was sitting there at the back of the class, and I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna cry. Like, why would they do that? And then I didn't stop thinking about that for like weeks. And also, I don't know if you guys have seen the original Willy Wonka. I don't even know why I was watching it, but it was on TV. And in the scene where they go through the tunnel, in the original version, that scene is just cut with like all of these little clips of like extremely disgusting things and animal cruelty. Like, it was like all these animals like getting cut in half, like chicken heads getting cut off. Why? Okay, I don't know why that was in the movie to start with, but that literally scarred me for life. I have a million other ones like this as well. Like, it's not just those two, but oh my god, I used to think about it all the time as a child. Like, it was literally traumatizing. Growing up, I don't think I knew much about feminism besides like Tumblr, Instagram, social media feminism. I always identified as a feminist, but I didn't like read any real theory, and I didn't even know what it was. I would just be like, yes, girl boss, very liberal feminism. Until I was probably like 18, or maybe during my last year of high school, I learned more about it as well. But I had, however, been vegan since I was 13. So in the exact same way that I used to see the oppression and violence against animals in everything. Like, imagine being a vegan and you go to lunch and everyone's just eating like cow. Like, like you just see it everywhere. Like, it's not something that you can escape, right? But back then, because I was like only a vegan, like I didn't really acknowledge misogyny and everything. But it's the same thing now. I see the oppression and violence against women in everything, even in animal cruelty. And we're gonna get to that. But essentially, like, animals, I was like, everyone sees animals as lesser beings, you know? But now I'm like, everyone sees women as lesser beings too. Like, and that is connected. We'll talk about it. In the same way as well that we assume, or socially and like historically, we've assumed that men and women are innately different. We also assume in a similar way that human and non-human animals are innately like severely different. And I see that every day in like with how people interact in discussions about women and meat eating. And I know it's not the same because obviously like there is zero divide at all between men and women besides what's created. But I would argue a lot of the divide between human and animal as well is created or it's based on us intellectualizing things rather than anything that's actually real. When you have a conversation regarding veganism and when you have a conversation regarding feminism, it's the same conversation. Kate Millett demonstrated in Sexual Politics, which I talked about 2 episodes ago, I think, that the word fuck was synonymous with kill, hurt, or destroy. I've talked previously about how heterosexual sex very often, and increasingly often, via the normalization of violence through pornography, just has a man gaining power through a woman's forced submission, right? This is a fused oppression of women and animals, because when you use a term like fuck, which Kate Millett has said, I mean, and we can see this as well, it's like a very aggressive term. That is the fused oppression between women and animals, because men to some degree if you see women as lesser beings, then you see them as animals because we see animals as lesser beings. So through that power of naming and through the power of language there, it's kind of a feedback loop to continuously exert those power dynamics, both over women and over animals as well. So with this episode, I hope to go a little bit deeper into those connections and explain them a bit, and entwine the treatment of animals and other forms of like human-based oppression, because it's not just women, it's also other forms of oppression as well. They're all connected. I actually had a comment on a TikTok about marriage. Oh my god, the comments on this TikTok actually like set women back 150 years. I was shocked. But I was talking about how I'm like, why are people still getting married in 2025? There's actually zero reasoning. I have all the Americans in the comments being like, oh, what about the legal protections when you get married? I'm like, do you not think that's weird that you are forced into getting married in order to have legal protections? Because based on their comments, I don't think the US has de facto, or maybe they just don't know about it, but like Australia has had de facto relationships since 1975. Like, it's not a new idea that you shouldn't have to get married to have legal protections for a relationship. Anyway, my point there was that I was talking about how marriage is like not ever a feminist choice, because you're taking part in an institution that has been built on the combination of capitalism and male supremacy and the ownership of women. And someone commented, women are dying in Palestine, you know? And honestly, if you can't conceptualize how marriage, which is, again, as I said, a interconnection between patriarchy and capitalism, if you can't conceptualize how that relates to a genocide that is based on patriarchy and capitalism, I genuinely can't help you. And that comment had so many likes as well. In this episode, we're mainly going to be referencing one specific book. If you're watching the video version, it's behind me. It's the red book. It's The Sexual Politics of Meat by Carol J. Adams. I have already talked about this in my first book review episode that I did. Though I felt for years now that there's an inherent closeness between veganism and feminism, not even just because more women are likely to be vegan, and I'd say that is because we're socialized to literally be better people, because we're socialized to have empathy, which men are not. Nothing quite puts it into words like The Sexual Politics of Meat by Carol J. Adams, which I read in, I want to say January, initially published in 1990 and subtitled A Feminist-Vegetarian Critique. I read the 35th anniversary edition, which literally came out this year, which has been renamed A Feminist-Vegan Critique to include also particularly female animals who have their reproductive system taken advantage of for the production of milk and eggs. The 35th anniversary edition also includes an introduction by Adams, wherein she says, in early October 1974, I realized a connection existed between feminism and vegetarianism, and between meat eating and a patriarchal world. From that moment forward, I was pulled into new ways of thinking about these seemingly different issues. When we talk about intersectionality, it literally never includes animals, but it should, because they are connected ideas. I'm not saying ever that I think an animal death is necessarily equal to a human death or whatever. Like, you can think whatever you want about that. But it's rather that the ideas and the form of oppression is connected. Adams also wrote of reading feminist theory in general as a woman and how her consciousness and that of the women she knew gained new dimensions. In learning about feminist theory, dimensions are constantly added, like typically from going from someone who's like a liberal feminist, from then entwining race and class analyses to rejecting capitalism, and finally, hopefully for people, rejecting patriarchal meat eating as well. For patriarchy is built on fragmenting these forms of oppression. Like, people don't want you to know that eating meat is also a form of upholding the patriarchy, right? By now, we've realized that, of course, like capitalism and race and class are connected to those things as well. But I really want to connect meat eating and the oppression of animals to those ideas too. Adams says the killing of animals for food and the reproductive exploitation of female animals for their lactation products and eggs are feminist issues that feminists fail to claim because of the charged atmosphere of food choices. So this book is divided into a couple different chapters. I'm not going to talk about all of them because I want to focus mainly on like the theory side of it. One of the first chapters is called Meat as Masculine. Throughout history, people with power have always eaten meat because dietary habits have proclaimed class distinctions, which is pretty like obvious thing, I think. People who are richer, who have had access to better food, and historically meat has been seen as a better food, I guess because it's more difficult to obtain, it's more expensive. In terms of nutritional value, I don't know how accurate that would be, but this has also been successful in showing meat as a superior food, essentially just because it's been associated with higher classes. When women are seen as a class, meat eating also proclaims patriarchal distinctions. Women are more likely to eat second-class foods like vegetables, fruits, and grains rather than meat. Adams says the sexism in meat eating recapitulates the class distinctions with an added twist. A mythology permeates all classes that meat is a masculine food and meat eating a male activity. This also entwines with other ideas about equality. It wouldn't make it equal for women to begin eating the same amount of meat as men, or for like the concept of meat eating to lose its male basedness. That wouldn't help anyone. In the same way, it wouldn't make women suddenly equal for us to begin taking advantage of other women like men do. Rather, you have to reject that whole idea altogether, and not partake in things that are based in the patriarchy. Only in the ending of these institutions would women be free. Let me relate that back to marriage as well. I have all of these lesbians in my replies being like, but it's two women, therefore it okay. I'm like, well, no, you're still taking part in the institution that oppresses women. As a gay person, I don't know why you would want to partake in it anyway, because it has been anti-woman and anti-LGBTQIA+ for like the entirety of its existence as marriage. And then you also get the arguments that it's like, well, that's a very Eurocentric take on marriage. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's because Europe spread that form of marriage to the rest of the world through colonialism. So that's how it is now, unfortunately. Men are seen as requiring meat, aka the superior and better quality food. And that is also why women starve at a disproportionate rate to men. Lisa Leghorn and Mary Rudkowski, in their book Who Really Starves Women and World Hunger, concluded that women engage in a deliberate self-deprivation, giving men better food at the expense of their own nutritional needs. And better food is usually, as I've said, defined to be meat. This also brings me to the question, like, are men really providers? Or have men ever really been providers when women are giving up their own food and their own nutritional needs to give meat or other better quality foods to men, or save it for men because men are seen as like requiring it to survive, whereas women are okay to just survive, like nutritionally deficient? Even, for example, the equation of like cookbooks, where like barbecue cookbooks are always like manly barbecue sausage on the barbecue. And then women's cookbooks are like, oh my god, let's make a cupcake together. Even that association of meat-based cooking, the only time men are cooking in cookbooks is like when they're barbecuing, when they're on the grill. Like, do you know what I mean? Men who do not eat meat as well are stripped of their masculinity because meat eating is so associated with men and power. Also, men who batter women have like often used the excuse or the reason for the battering being a lack of meat. Like if a woman fails to cook meat for her husband, he will take that as a form of violence against him. I'm not saying this is every couple, by the way, but this has genuinely happened where men take that like lack of masculine food as feminizing them or being a form of violence to not give men the meat they require. Anyway, in a time where we are very quickly going backwards, just in every way, we have so many oftentimes white men engaging with a carnivore diet. Similarly, actually, women who are part of that like hippie Mother Nature, give my period blood back to earth. I don't even know how to like refer to that group of people, but they're also simultaneously rejecting feminism and veganism by like taking part in that like raw meat, carnivore, keto sort of diet. And men, again, like the fucking Liver King or whatever, like not only is he expressing a hate for animals, that is also innately expressing a hate for women. Like, and again, we're gonna get into this more, but like those types of men, they always hate women at the same time. And there's a reason for that, and that's because animal rights and women's rights are connected. Both of these groups also reject science. Another, again, progressive discipline, which is based on actual fact and research and truth, through engaging in a carnivore diet, which obviously is insanely unhealthy, but also they're usually against like sunscreen and vaccines. I saw a TikTok the other day and it confused me so much. It was like a girl, she was saying like all of these things that she like hates, like all of these things that she would never want to like be around or engage in or whatever. From that list, she said she was against like porn, cosmetic surgery, drink driving, removing body hair, reality shows. I was like, wow, like she's so right. You know what else she put on that list? Sunscreen. That like is hypocritical. What do you mean you're against all of these like really progressive things? I mean, you're against really like all of these, like you're for all of these progressive things, and then you're against sunscreen. I don't even know what to say to that. Also, as someone with a biomedical science degree, skin cancer is genuinely the easiest cancer to understand. Like the way that it forms is typically, or for the most part, it's through like one very specific way of your DNA mutating. It's really easy to understand. Like it's really easy to understand. Other cancers I understand because like there's so many different things which impact them, like your environment, like lifestyle choices, food choices, everything. And all of those can impact skin cancer as well. But skin cancer is literally caused by the sun. Like that's that's literally all there is to it. Like it's the easiest form of cancer to understand and know how to prevent as well. My point there is being anti-science, being anti-women, and being anti-animals, they're all connected. Isadora Duncan, I think she was an American dancer, but in her memoir, she said, from cutting the throat of a young calf to cutting the throat of our brothers and sisters is but a step. While we are ourselves the living graves of murdered animals, how can we expect any ideal conditions on earth? Again, I think that's a really good quote because while you are yourself oppressing a group, how can you ever expect anyone to be free? And I think that goes for like liberal feminists as well, simultaneously while they're doing things which were created by men to oppress women and trying to relabel them as liberatory. That's not gonna work. Like, no woman's gonna be free while you're still saying that like things which are oppressive to women are actually freeing to us. Not only is there like a sexualized politics of meat in making meat masculine, but there's also a racialized politics of meat. White supremacy, obviously very closely aligned with male supremacy, and that is seen historically in the view of meat as a superior food saved for white men, whereas vegetables and grains, as I've said, often saved for white women as well, but also they are the food for other races. Like, because meat is seen as so superior, it is related with white men. It is therefore both a racist and sexist upholding of meat eating. Dick Gregory, an American activist from Missouri, I think he was like a comedian and a writer as well. In his book, The Shadow That Scares Me, he said, "Animals and humans suffer and die alike. If you had to kill your own hog before you ate it, most likely you would not be able to do that. To hear the hog scream, to see the blood spill, to see the baby being taken away from its mum, and to see the look of death in the animal's eye would turn your stomach. So you get the men at the packing house to do the killing for you. In like manner, if the wealthy aristocrats who are perpetrating conditions in the ghetto actually heard the screams of ghetto suffering, or saw the slow death of hungry little kids, or witnessed the strangulation of manhood and dignity, they could not continue the killing, but the wealthy are protected from such horror. If you can justify killing to eat meat, you can justify the conditions of the ghetto. I cannot justify either one." This book is about racism in America, but he tied in animal suffering as well, because again, it is another connected yet oftentimes forgot about form of oppression. As long as people have a power dynamic against animals, people are going to think they can have a power dynamic against other people as well, especially when certain groups of people are being seen as animals or being seen as lesser beings. Audre Lorde also compared the usage of animals to racism in her book, The Uses of Anger, Women Responding to Racism. "We have learned to use anger as we have learned to use the dead flesh of animals, and bruised, battered, and changing, we have survived and grown, and we are moving on." I've quoted Lorde a few times. Every time I say that, I'm like, I'm quoting Lorde Rib's Pure Heroin album. No, Audre Lorde, but honestly, I'd quote Ella Lorde as well. That is not her last name. But she also said there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issued lives. And what she meant by that, again, was just an intersectional take on feminism and how you can't just look at like tunnel vision to that one issue. You have to take into account all of the issues which are affecting people because they're all connected. Audre Lorde wasn't the only vegan or vegetarian feminist throughout history. It was really common for female figures and like early feminists and stuff as well to be vegetarian or vegan. For example, Charlotte Bronte, Louisa May Alcott, Rosa Parks, Angela Davis, and Alice Walker. Veganism is not new to the feminist movement. Like, all of these women have been around and have talked about being vegetarian or vegan for a long time. You may have also noticed that most of those vegan feminists are Black women. Black Americans are almost 3 times more likely to be vegan or vegetarian than the general population. I feel like this statistic tends to shock people because they associate veganism with like white hippies, which, to be fair, that is how the media has portrayed it. And also, it is true, a lot of the like well-known vegan figures tend to be white people. But realistically, that is just because that is what makes it to the mainstream. Again, probably because of racist reasons. But there is actually a long history of Black veganism all around the world. An article from the BBC talks about why more Black Americans tend to be vegan, and it has a lot to do with recognizing the racial injustices that contribute to many Black Americans having a poorer diet, and this can include like poverty, living in food deserts, which are kind of like a crazy thing, but apparently a lot of places in America, it is like not even possible to access fresh food. And in those places as well, it's probably much more easier to access fast food as well, and that contributes to why Black Americans tend to have a poorer diet. This means that this group typically has higher rates of hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and cancer than most other groups. This ties in again to what Dick Gregory lived by. He said, "Because I'm a civil rights activist, I'm also an animal rights activist. Animals and humans suffer and die alike. Violence causes the same pain, the same spilling of blood, the same stench of death, the same arrogant, cruel, and vicious taking of life. We shouldn't be a part of it." Slaughterhouse work as well, which is very often done by marginalized people, can lead to domestic violence, social withdrawal, anxiety, drug and alcohol abuse, and PTSD. I don't think anyone should be expected to have their job just being continuously taking the life of non-human animals, because there is no way that that is not going to negatively affect them. And I don't think that can be offset just by giving them access to like psychological services or certain things like that. Like, your brain is going to be destroyed for life if you're working in a slaughterhouse and all you do is just kill animals every day. Like, I don't think I would never want anyone in the world to have to do that job. According to PTSD Journal, these employees are hired to kill animals such as pigs and cows that are largely gentle creatures. Carrying out this action requires workers to disconnect from what they are doing and from the creature standing before them. That desensitization makes it easier for them to be desensitized to other forms of violence, again, such as domestic abuse. It's easier for them to become domestically abusive, particularly domestically abusive, by the way. Other forms of violent crimes aren't typically increased in slaughterhouse workers. So does that relate again to the view of animals and women as similar? Yes. Not only this, but much farming land has highly negative impacts on those who live nearby, which again is people in marginalized groups. For example, like living close to certain types of farmland means just constantly breathing in like chemicals which are not safe to be breathed in. And then these people also have higher risks of developing certain medical conditions as well, just because they live close to areas where animals are farmed. As I've said, animals seem to be a forgotten group when it comes to liberation, which is not to say that animals or like animal liberation needs to come first, or that animal liberation needs to be at the forefront, but rather that it is another dimension of intersectionality when it comes to racial and sexual analyses of society. Like, in order for us to be liberated, I don't think at the same time we could be factory farming animals and routinely murdering other creatures. But again, that doesn't mean that I think it should be like at the forefront or anything. I just think it should be something that is considered. And I'm going to talk about quickly like different types of economies, how they impact gender, and also how they tend to be based on meat production as well. Adams talks about how economies or societies based on meat eating often have similarities between gender and species inequality. While women also have hunted in like early societies, of course, for a lot of cultures, obtaining meat was performed by men, and this meat became, or it becomes, a strong economic commodity. So those who controlled meat production or meat, obtaining meat, had more power. Women's status is therefore inversely related to the importance of meat in non-technological societies. In Female Power and Male Dominance on the Origins of Sexual Inequality by Peggy Sandy, she surveyed info on over 100 non-technological societies and found a correlation between plant-based economies and women's power, and conversely, animal-based economies and men's power. In addition, when large animals are hunted in a culture, fathers are more distant, such as like they're not in frequent or regular proximity to infants, which means then that the job of child rearing falls onto women, and then it ends up like the society that we have now. So the production or the eating of meat in societies has also been shown directly to be related to male dominance in societies as well. Economies dependent on processing of animals for food have specific characteristics. Sexual segregation in work activities, with women doing more work than men, but work that is less valued, women being responsible for childcare, the worship of male gods, and patrilineality. Plant-based economies are more likely to be egalitarian. Even if women's work is supporting the economy, they still don't abuse that power. Like, even if women have more power because their work is what supports the economy in this culture, that power still doesn't get abused by them and like turned into women are better than men sort of thing. Another concept that Adams comes back to a lot of times in this book is the idea of the absent referent, and also in correlation to that, the like sexualized politics of meat as well. She says, just as dead bodies are absent from our language about meat in descriptions of cultural violence, women are also often the absent referent. Rape carries such potent imagery that the term is transferred from the literal experience of women and applied metaphorically to other instances of violent devastation. The experiences of women thus become a vehicle for describing other oppressions. Women upon whose bodies actual rape is most often committed become the absent referent when the language of sexual violence is used metaphorically. For example, as well, when we talk about like meat, it's always given different names. Like, you're not eating cow, you're eating beef. And beef is realistically just the dead version of a cow. But when you refer to it as beef, the absent referent to that is the real living animal that had to die for that. But in using a different term, the animal becomes absent, if that makes sense. Adams notes that sexual violence and meat eating have an intersection in the absent referent. An example of a brothel with a name translated to House of Slaughter, where girls serve 80 to 120 sex buyers per night, or for example, bondage equipment, which like chains, dog collars, and ropes, recall the treatment of animals. The animal body is absent, but it is referred to. Such as when we refer to the rape of animals, women's sexual violence is the absent referent in that scenario. Adams says the interaction between physical oppression and the dependence on metaphors that rely on the absent referent indicates that we distance ourselves from whatever is different by equating it with something that we have already objectified. Once we consider certain groups as animal-like or subhuman, they are treated accordingly. Like, once we are using a metaphor for women's like rape or like brutal treatment, if we again use that term in a different scenario, we are referring to the women who have gone through that, but they're absent. And there are also a lot of other examples of how this relates between animals and women. The butchering of an animal is also oftentimes equated to rape. Rape survivors have often used the term that they felt like a piece of meat. Anesthesia before butchering can be compared to rape drugs before rape. We oppress animals by associating them with women's lesser status and vice versa. One of the foundations of rape culture is that women not only ask for rape, but they also enjoy it. Similarly, animals are not only just made to be eaten, they're not only like bred just to be eaten, but they also have no other meaning or no other like reason to be alive other than just to be meat. And women are seen in the same way, as I said, when it's like women are simultaneously asking to be raped, but then that's also all that they're good for. Their reproductive system, for example, is all that they're good for. Anthroponography is another idea mentioned in this book. It is a neologism coined by Amy Hamlin in 2003 in The Pornography of Meat, her book, to identify and give a word to the sexualizing and feminizing of animals, particularly those consumed as meat. Much of this analysis I took from a book review on Storygraph by user Another Anarchist. The last word is a slur for lesbians, so I won't say it, but that's her at. She somewhat paraphrased what Adams mentioned in the book. Animals in bondage are similar to women in BDSM. The message is clear: we are sexually available, as our only desire is to be used, degraded, or consumed. It is the same thing. When we see violence against animals, women are not depicted, but we are always the absent referent. She says there is a cycle of objectification, fragmentation, and consumption, which links butchering and sexual violence in our culture. Objectification permits oppressor to view another being as an object. The oppressor then violates this object-like treatment. For example, the rape of women that denies women the freedom to say no, or the butchering of animals that converts animals from living, breathing beings into dead objects or meat. This process allows fragmentation or brutal dismemberment, and finally consumption. While the occasional man may literally eat women, we all consume visual images of women all the time, particularly visual images of women that are really extreme and violent. As Adam said in her book as well, vegetarianism does more than rebuke a meat-eating society. It rebukes a patriarchal society, since, as we have seen, meat eating is associated with male power. Colonialist British male beef eaters are not viewed positively if you do not approve of eating meat, patriarchal control, or colonialism. Indeed, misogyny hedges no words in exclaiming against vegetarianism because of a suspected anti-male bias. In seeing the nothingness flesh has become, we strip it of its phallocentric meaning and deny it any symbolic patriarchal meaning that requires an absent referent. I also saw a tweet the other day that used the idea of an absent referent without even meaning to. It said, there is no fixed definition of masculinity or femininity. It's rather just that masculine is good and feminine is bad. If men do something you don't like, instead of criticizing them, you call them feminine. A way of blaming women even when there are no women involved. Women in this scenario are the absent referent. When you call a man feminine, you're actually calling him a woman, which is a lesser being, but she is just the absent referent. Because femininity is so closely related to women, you are essentially calling him a woman, aka lesser than a man. Actually, this happens even more often when we talk about misogynistic men who are then called gay, and simultaneously women and gay men are the absent referent then. But like, honestly, it is more so women that are the absent referent. You are referring to a man as gay, aka being someone who is like attracted to other men, or being someone who's more feminine, or like somehow in that being gay is bad. And that is because calling someone gay the absent referent is either you just hate gay men, or the absent referent to that is the femininity associated with being a woman. Also, like, gay men being the absent referent for something bad, instead of just the fact that being misogynistic in itself is bad. Like, men who like treat women badly or are in relationships with women and treat them badly, it's not because they're gay, it's because they hate women. You can still be a straight man and hate women. That happens all the time. Also, like, sorry to the gay men who are now like being associated with all these like horrifically misogynistic men, and then being like, yeah, actually he's just gay. No, he's just misogynistic. Like, I'm gonna go over some other like overall similarities and connections between veganism and feminism. As I've mentioned, attempting to discuss veganism and feminism will have an almost identical reaction. Adam said, the vegetarian enthusiastic reformer sees the opportunity as one of education. For example, in like a meat eater asking like about vegetarian food, or like what vegans eat, or I don't know, like asking why someone's vegan. But that is not actually an opportunity for education. Instead, it is a teasing game of manipulation. At times, ludicrous questions are raised. They imply that the entire discussion is ludicrous. I'm sure if you have like any feminist beliefs, even like as a liberal feminist, you relate to this. Like, a man will be like, oh, explain your like, why do you think that way? But they're not actually asking to know. They're asking so that they can win an argument against you, or they're asking that they can like make fun of you. And honestly, in my life, I'd say this has happened more times when it comes to veganism than feminism. But I think like to some degree, especially if you're like in a group of women, they're like typically going to agree with you when you're talking about feminism, but those same women aren't going to agree with you when it comes to talking about veganism. So yeah. Adams also continues to say, questions of definition often predominate. Whereas feminists were parlaying questions which trivialize feminism, such as, are you one of those bra burners? Vegetarians must define themselves against the trivializations of, are you one of those health nuts, or are you one of those animal lovers? While feminists encountered the response, men need liberation too, vegetarians are greeted by the postulate that plants have life too. Or to make the issue even more ridiculous, they'll be like, but what of the vegetables that you're eating right now? They have feelings too. Do you not see how that's like when you're talking about oh my God, and this has happened so many times in Australia recently. In the last 10 days, I think 8 women have died as a result of violence in Australia. Do you know how men reply to that? Well, how many men have died? Yeah, how many men have died at the hands of other men? Therefore, it is still a male violence issue. But anyway, the only reason they're saying that is to make all of your ideas seem ludicrous. They're not actually trying to bring up an argument that has any base. They're just trying to make you seem crazy. And that's the exact same thing that happens when you're having debates about veganism or animal rights. It continues on to say, a feminist emphasis on sexual violence is judged as hysterical, a vegetarian's emphasis on the death of animals as emotional. Both feminists and vegetarians are accused of negativity because they appear to require that something be given up, the way men benefit from misogyny or the meat on the plate, as opposed to their own perspective in which they are emphasizing the positive choice to emancipation and liberation, or choosing vegetables, grains, and fruits. One specific case of a similarity between the use of animals and women can be found in prostitution. More specifically, the creation of sexual infrastructure in the last decade, kind of referred to as drive-thru sex boxes, which to me emulate feedlots and milking chambers. There's a couple articles on this that are essentially the same by random newspapers. I'm just referring to one by The Guardian, and it says, located on the edge of town, the result of this sex infrastructure is kind of a sex drive-through. Customers drive down a one-way street in a roughly 2-acre open air space where sex workers can offer their service. Once hired, the sex worker accompanies the customer into a semi-private parking stall. For safety, the stall allows sex workers to easily flee if necessary. The stall is designed so that the driver's door can't be opened, but the passenger one can, and there's an emergency button to call for help. Social workers are present on site and offer a place to rest, stay warm, and access services. In the same way, Amsterdam's red light district has become just a spot for tourism. Most of the sex buyers who partake in this sort of drive-through sex event are also sex tourists. The effect is that these women are used solely for their sexual ability and unknowingly also by the government who is creating this infrastructure. Instead of even attempting to do anything to help these women get into other jobs, instead they just build infrastructure to make it safer, which to some degree it probably does make it safer for these women. But if you're not at the same time also trying to help women who are forced into prostitution because they can't work any other jobs, then it's kind of useless. Also, the government is knowingly putting them in dangerous scenarios because the fact that you have to build it with an emergency button, or you have to build it in a way that allows them to flee if necessary, there shouldn't be in a job that requires an ability to flee because of how likely it is that a scenario becomes violent or endangers the life of the employee. That just shouldn't be a job. And instead of again, it probably does help in a safety way to some degree of women who are going to be working in this industry regardless. But that needs to be coupled with so much support and helping women get out of the industry rather than just being okay, now it's safe now, everyone can work here. Anyway, the similarities between this and factory farming are endless. Are being forced into an enclosed space and having her genitalia or reproductive system or body in general used for the benefit of another at the expense of themselves, whether that be sexual use, stealing of bodily materials, or just literal murder. It's all the selfish use of another person. And also, when you're taking into account meat eating as well, it's not only the selfish use of animals, it's also the selfish use of the other humans that are required to work in this industry. And especially if they're men, they're probably going to be like domestically abusing their wives. They're going to have like severe mental like repercussions to having worked in this industry. So not only is it hurting animals, it's also hurting other marginalized groups, as I've said. I also didn't mention this before, but I meant to. When we were talking about the absent referent, I feel like this hasn't been as common in the last like decade or so. That is kind of like, I don't even know how to explain this, like kind of like fast food ads or like really specific forms of like food advertising, like really like greasy like pizza, like burgers and stuff, and how so often they would have like a perfect like blonde American woman as like the poster girl for these sorts of things. And it hadn't been common in advertising for a while until I think the Super Bowl this year, and I want to say it was like Carl Jr. I don't know what they're called, but they had an ad with, again, one of those like classic American blonde, skinny, perfect body women, and she was holding a burger. That is like, there's kind of an idea there of like forcing women to partake in the patriarchy by forcing them to eat like all of like this like disgusting, like greasy, gross fast food. And again, it's also sexualizing that food as well when it's having like this like sex symbol in America being advertised alongside it. And I think that was really indicative of how America is going so backwards back into like conservatism, because that is literally the most conservative idea ever. Even though people will think it's like sex positive, it's the opposite. It's promoting Puritanism. It's like, anyway, it was just something interesting I noticed. There was an article by Elizabeth Enochs, like a Medium article titled, "To Uphold My Feminist Values, I Went Vegan." Enochs discusses her experience with becoming vegan as a feminist choice. She says, like, I think one of her friends was being like, if you're like such a feminist, why are you still with a boyfriend you hate? You need to start like holding up this feminist shit and actually doing it in your life. And she said at that time, her friend didn't even know that like her boyfriend was not necessarily abusing her, but enjoyed hurting her during like sex and things like that. And so she says, of all the feminist shit I've done in the past 3 years after her friend said that to her, going vegan takes the cruelty-free cake. Nothing else has empowered me to set healthy boundaries and call out sexist bullshit, like extending my circle of compassion to farmed animals. Importantly, Enochs relates this to her own experience being abused by men, and how realistically this is the same as us systemically abusing animals. She says, as someone who was raped quietly by their partner in a bed, who was pushed, pinned, and choked, but never punched, kicked, or cut, I realized I could no longer participate in a system that enables consumers to absolve their guilt by minimizing someone else's pain. Pain is pain, and there's no acceptable way to hurt, forcibly dominate, or exploit someone. Again, I would relate that to fucking the BDSM scene. And I feel like the way people talk about like veganism, being anti-vegan and like being like anti like Puritanism is very similar as well. It's like they're against like pacifism or something. Like, for example, like they'll look at vegans and be like, no, but like I actually just like meat, so I'm gonna eat it anyway. Or they'll look at women trying to educate them on like the dangers of engaging with men who are into violating them, and they'll be like, yeah, but I actually like it, so it's whatever. She also said the idea that exploiting some animals for their milk, meat, and eggs is acceptable, while other animals are meant to be pets or to live in the wild, is the same sort of logic that sexism, misogyny, classism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism, ableism, and every other form of discrimination are based on. I would agree with that as well. For example, every time I'm like to a non-vegan, I'm like, well, would you eat your dog? They're like, oh my God, how would you even suggest that? I'm like, what's the difference though? What's the difference actually? Because the pig that you're eating right now probably has a higher sentience level than your ugly little ratty, like white furry dog. Also, can I add, so many people think that vegans are animal lovers. I don't even like animals that much. Like, honestly, I don't really like being around like most animals. I don't like people's pets. I like my own dogs, but like, I don't really want to see yours, especially again, if it's one of those ratty, disgusting, eyes bulging out of its head dog. Like, that's disgusting. I don't want to see it. It's not because I love animals. It's because I think the oppression of animals not only is horrific, but it also interconnects with the oppression of women and any other group. I'm not an animal lover. In the same way that I'm not a man hater. Like, do you know what I mean? She also said in her experience, like, how being vegan had like helped her. She says, it doesn't undo all of the times that family members, co-workers, friends, or boyfriends did things to my body that I didn't want them to do. And it doesn't change the fact that I spent years in an abusive relationship. But it is incredibly empowering to know that I'm not contributing to an industry that profits from abusing innocent bodies and exploiting the female reproductive system. No matter what kind of day I'm having, I know that I'm making a difference. And like, honestly, that was kind of helpful to me as well. When I was reading that, I was like, so true. At least like in becoming vegan, it's realistically a lifelong boycott of any of the industries that are negative and hurting both people and animals. Like, I don't think you can say that you're a vegan and then shop on Temu. Like, realistically, all of those things are connected. Also, there was a feminist that I quoted in my BDSM episode. Her name is Manisha Decker. Also, everything comes back to that episode because it was so good. Like, if you haven't listened to that yet, go and listen to it because it was so good. Like, I kind of served tea with that episode. Anyway, she was talking about how women are unable to see relationships without domination and submission, without power imbalances. And I think that relates here as well. In her book titled Animals as Legal Beings, she offers a new idea of a legal system to transform our like settler colonial anthropocentric ideas to account for systemic violence against animals. She aims to alter current legal outlooks on animals, which are very binary, like identifying beings as either property or personhood, essentially. And rather, she suggests a new category of beingness. Decker draws on feminist animal care tradition, feminist theory, post-colonial theory, and critical animal studies to make these claims, attempting to harmonize the ideas in an intersectional way. She argues that many anti-cruelty laws still assign a property status to animals, which then focuses not on the best interests of the animals, but rather of the property owner. She draws on feminist theory to create the idea of beingness, whereby animals would be synonymous with their bodies, not stigmatized on their perceived cognitive or physical differences, which again relates so much to how people see women as well. Realistically, the only differences we have with men are the fact that we're perceived to be specific ways. And I think obviously like animals are very different to humans, but I think again, as I've said, a lot of that just comes down to our perception of animals as humans who have higher intelligence. And how, like, I think that's so based on how we center humans and not necessarily actually anything like real about how we see animals. The only reason we think that they're like subpar or like lesser than us is based on the fact of like how we center human intelligence, if that makes sense, and how historically we have centered like male supremacy or anything based in being a male and like all of these other things, and how that is related to how again we center humans over animals. I have a couple ending notes for you. I hope you enjoy them. I guess I just want to say like being vegan also relates to being a pacifist. Wars justify meat eating as they establish like a morality that recognizes some forms of killing as legitimate, in the same way that when we have specific forms of oppression, we recognize some forms as legitimate. if you kill animals, you're recognizing that some forms of killing are legitimate. Similarly, as non-vegans, you accept that like that form of oppression against animals is okay because they're animals. Which again, just like, I don't think you can think it like that, because then it just, that oppressing anything or thinking that you have power dynamics over anything necessarily like converts over to other forms of oppression based in race and sexism specifically. To liberate all people, we must oppose all forms of oppression, essentially. And I've talked like quite theoretically between like the associations about veganism and other forms of oppression. But this book also has chapters on the use of language and veganism throughout literature, as well as more on like the history of vegetarianism, which I probably will focus on in another episode as well. I have two like really amazing quotes to end with you here. Actually, the first one's really sweet. It's by Fran Winnett, who was one founder of the Gay Liberation Front. She says, "Eat rice, have faith in women." And then I have another really good quote for you by the musical duo 303. And they said, "Tell your boyfriend if he says he's got beef that I'm a vegetarian and I ain't fucking scared of him." And I will be ending on that. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Make sure you give The Sexual Politics of Meat a read as well, because there's so much more information in that book than I even talked about in this episode. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope you guys can bring more vegan ideas into your life. Anyway, have a good week, and I will see you next Saturday, hopefully. Bye.